Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Mathyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. In chapter 13, we've spoken about the two orders of reality, Satya and Mithya. This is the essence of Vedanta that we have to understand. In fact, this is the essence of whereby the seeking stops. Otherwise, if we do not understand one order of reality, then we're always going to be focused on one, whereas we're going to feel incomplete because we do not understand the other. So the Satya Mithya teaching is the pinnacle of the Vedantic Upanishads. And to understand this prakriti, this order of reality that is called transactional, the Vyavaharika, we have to get to know it a little bit more specific. Not only from the macrocosm, which we have spoken in terms of the five elements and coming together of the subtle elements coming together, forming the gross elements, and then the gross elements, out of them, we have this world. Now, when you think of these elements, it doesn't necessarily mean the actual physical space, the actual physical air, the actual physical water, even though yes, also we can see the very grossified version of these elements in the form of water, the grossified version of these five elements in the form of the soil that we grow trees and we have lovely fruits and then we consume these fruits. But these elements are also in a form of knowledge. They're also in the form of what the reality that we experience. And to help us understand this reality, we create terms. So it's not like these five elements are out there, right? It's not like they actually exist. And this is the important understanding. To help you understand what to negate, you have to give the mind something to negate. And what exactly are you going to give the mind to negate? You're going to first construct a model of the world. And then you're going to see, if you negate this model, what remains? There remains a conscious subject. And then we go into the nature of that conscious subject. And we say the nature of this conscious subject is satyam, consciousness. And the same nature of these five elements appearing as the world are also that one consciousness. Now, it's very easy to see consciousness or to recognize consciousness in a person, isn't it? Because we say, I'm a conscious being. But how do you understand this consciousness in a stone or a rock? Oh, easy. We already discussed before that consciousness and existence are not apart. So you say rock is, but you also say my existence is, right? So no matter what we say, it exists. And this existence is not apart from consciousness. In fact, they're just one order of reality. They're the same order of reality called satyam, from two different ways to approach it. In other words, everything is. Now, you say, okay, I understand everything exists, but how does it manifest in the form of this and that, a rock or water or a leaf or clouds or a sun or this and that? What is the ultimate cause? We've already talked about it is prakriti, it is maya. So now, having heard that in chapter 13, naturally you want to ask, at least Arjuna is asking now Krishna in chapter 14, how exactly does this prakriti express in the form of behaviors? Because we relate much more to ourselves, our own, and people. How does these forces, these energies, manifest through our speech, our thinking, our ways of calculating, our ways of assessing? How do we recognize what to negate in the first place? So we can look at this teaching in two ways. Number one, recognize what is anatma, so that it can be later on recognized as this is an appearance of this one reality that I am, Brahman. The second way to approach this teaching, this chapter 14 model, is to say, what is it that this world is? What moves this world? How does this world go about? In other words, it lets us fall back onto a model instead of saying this world is a mystery. You've heard that before, How does all this work? It's just one big mystery. In other words, by understanding Gunas, from which the five elements come, from which this world arises, in different shapes, colors, sounds, smells, tastes. We always have something to fall back on when we do not understand something. Because is it not true? When we do not understand something, you're agitated by that, right? Because we do not know. We want to know. So these gunas, this model allows you to fall back onto some knowledge when you have no explanation. What is it that makes your client erratic? What makes you have this amazing moment of revelation or epiphany or clarity, and then makes you some other days just dull, right? No matter what you do, it's just dull, right? Before we say, oh, it's me, we take it personally. Now we have something to fall back on. We say, this is the grand order in the form of these three energies, the three gunas, operating through this instrument, just like they're operating through every instrument. On some days, I may not have it my way. On some days, you may not have it your way. You just wake up and it's not working out. You're not as shiny as you would like to be, right? And then you have those days when you are, right? And you go, this is so cool. Let's preserve this, but it doesn't work. But now you don't have to take it personally. You can always fall back onto this three model and you say, so these three forces, sattva, rajas, tamas, which is all that makes up this causal body, which when it expresses through billions of subtle bodies called the jivas, we'll talk about human beings. We can also talk about animals, but we'll talk about human beings. When they express through the jiva, they either reveal as the revealing power. They show themselves as the revealing power. What does the revealing power mean? It means that you're working on a project. You're working on a problem. It could be a business. You could be a corporate CEO. You could be an employee. You could be working on a research assignment or anything that you want to discover or to bring service to humanity or to your circle of influence. And you've been working on it. And you have this flash of insight. So this flash of insight is a result of this revealing power, because this revealing power, what is it? Well, it's self-explanatory. It reveals what was initially hidden. And what is it that hides? Tamaguna. Now, if you think about it, has to hide, because the only way we can transact in this reality is by hiding one in order to show another. In other words, I can only say to you, good day, if I don't say good evening. And I can only say goodbye if I don't say hello. In other words, if I say one, I'm not saying all the other options. In other words, we're always collapsing what we call this infinite grand order. And what do I mean by collapsing possibilities, collapsing the reality? We're collapsing the infinite potentiality that we call Maya in the form of language, in the form of knowledge, in the form of discoveries, in the form of appreciation, in the form of values, in the form of knowledge about existence. In other words, all we're ever doing in our lives is collapsing possibilities. And those possibilities already exist right now. They are there. So this revealing power in those short moments comes. What does it do? It allows us to collapse one of the possibilities that was there all along, just waiting for the mind to subside, the erratic mind to just chill out just a little bit, so that this knowledge can finally shine, exude itself that was there just waiting for itself to show. And this is how all discoveries get made. They were already there. It's not like we discover anything. We just tap into the vast grand order of infinite intelligence, and then our mind reveals that power as a result of sattva guna. Now, what's important to understand is, how does the sattva guna come? Lifestyle matters a lot. So if we do not have a supporting lifestyle, then we're simply not going to have the opportunity for the mind to be tapped into or to reveal the realities that are constantly around us. In fact, we talk about, the sages, right? The amazing clarity that they have. Well, what is that clarity? It's nothing but sattva guna. But how does that clarity come? That's what's the important question is, because what about for us? You need to create a sustainable lifestyle. Now, a sustainable lifestyle, we've already talked about a few ideas. There's no particular set of what to do. You already know. Generally, it's common sense. If one's involved in news, right? Anything that has a lot of movement or a lot of agitation-worthy content. For example, last year when we had the presidential election, right? Then there was so much movement. You could even feel it, especially in America. There was just so unsettling. And that's what we call the world collective catching on through this Raja Guna dominance. And it's more agitation, more unsettling. We don't know what's going to happen, worried, concerned. And you even know what happened last year when the scientists came on. Then they were generally criticized, like, we don't want knowledge, we want we want action, let's do something, let's close the borders, let's do this. But when someone came with a medical discovery or medical breakthrough, says here's how it spreads and here's what to do, put the masks on, no, we don't want to hear that. In other words, when a collective is dominated by Rajaguna, what happens? We end up projecting what? Ignorance that is already covering the ignorance that is covering our mind from reflective thinking, from introspection, from clarity. Therefore, when we project, why do we project? Because we are covered. What exactly is it covered? The buddhi. Covered from what? From receiving input from that one who is clear. Therefore, even in class or even in spirituality, what happens? We have a student who comes and they are fully available to learn, right? They want to know, but this projecting power is still projecting too many notions onto there. So they project onto the teacher, they project onto the Vedanta, they project onto so many variables that makes it simply impossible to receive information. So we see this all around us. How? Humanity can project on the basis of what? Of ignorance. Why is it projecting? Because it doesn't have the full information. When you have full information, when you know the facts, the person simply stops projecting, because what is it to project if I already know? So this is a general introduction, again, to the purpose behind this teaching. And it's a very useful teaching, because as we have a snake over here, see how a snake got in there? Naughty snake. So this snake is a lovely metaphor that we use in Vedanta, is that whereby if I do not have the full facts, then if the reality looks something approximate to what my notions already hold, then naturally, obviously those notions are not complete, that's called tamaguna, those notions that they're going to get projected to the nearest approximate reality. And this is what we call in Vedanta pratibhasika. Pratibhasika means your subjective personal experience that you have. That means it's your own bubble, your own version of reality. And this version of reality then gets projected onto this vyavaharika, this objective world, whereby we then see not the roe, but we see the snake. We see not the person, but we see the agenda. And that agenda has got nothing to do with the person. That agenda comes from our past, from our past childhood. Someone abused me, now I'm suspicious of people, so I project. Or the previous spiritual teaching didn't work, so why should this one work? The previous teacher didn't really do the job well, so why should this one? In other words, we then take the past and we project onto the present. So again, end of the day, all of these spiritual sadhanas come back to reducing this projecting and reducing this concealing, and thereby increasing your vision, your clarity. And one of the most effective ways to do this is through, that's why we have chapter 6 in the Bhagavad Gita, through Patanjali Yoga Sutra, which is an Ashtanga Yoga, the 8-step system, whereby you really start with your body and you start with your breathing, and then you start with your concentration, and then you're starting to focus off one particular object that you enjoy, that's meaningful to you, and just learn to hold your mind onto that one single point, to the point whereby it can stay there for, let's say, 10 or 20 minutes. And whenever another thought comes, it just doesn't bother you. Your mind goes right back to that single point in your mind. So my question to you is, suppose I gave you meditation, and the purpose of meditation was to focus what we usually call in the third eye, right, between the eyebrows, right? And just close the eyes and then put your as though you're looking in between here, and just hold that for 5 minutes. Breathe normally, and you hold that for 5 minutes. Okay. And to help you to sustain that thought, what you do is you keep on saying what's called a little, in japa. You could take either a mala, whereby every second you take another little ring, or you can say om, right? Every breath. So you breathe in, om, breathe out, om. Or another method is, and that I've been taught, and I've been doing it for maybe a year, and it's really worked well, is you breathe in, you close your eyes, you breathe in, and you do, while focusing, you do om 6 times. So you're breathing in, And each time you're going om, 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 and then breathe out. Om, 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 om. Or it could be anything that is meaningful to you. It doesn't have to be om, it can be something else. And you do that for 5 minutes, and then tomorrow do it for 10 minutes. And then after a month, your mind gets really sattvic, really clear, really sharp. And I've also done a few experiments whereby I stop this meditation. And what happens is immediately you can feel, considering the mind's sensitive, the habits of agitation, a little bit of shakiness starts to come back. So, and this is something this is why meditation is important sadhana in the spiritual field, because it is one of the most effective methods to preserve a sharp, focused, sattvic mind. And the yogis are not just ordinary people. They've been doing this for decades. And this is why we have this advanced system of meditation. So if you're asking, where does meditation come in all this? Meditation should actually be a part of your life, one way or the other. And there's many different meditation practices. Now, when I speak about meditation, I'm talking about closed eyes, right? Specific closed eyes in your room, maybe for 5 or 10 minutes. And there's another beautiful meditation whereby you close your eyes and you imagine a lotus flower in your chest, like a golden lotus flower. And when you breathe in, the lotus flower opens, expands. And when you breathe out, it closes. Breathe in, expands. Breathe out, it closes. And when you breathe in, you say sa, so sa. And then you breathe out, hum. Hamsa is swan in Sanskrit, and swan is pure. So it's a symbology for that which is pure, which is satyam. So sa, hum, sa, hum. Now, every day when I go out to the park here, I actually sit down by the pond and I just do any kind of meditation. This is usually I do this beautiful flower opening, flower closing, or do some pranayama for 5 minutes, or a simple focusing between the eyebrows. And this helps the mind to keep it very, sanctifies the mind. It keeps it holy. It keeps it pure. It keeps it clean. It keeps it enjoyable. A mind that we want to be with, a mind that we can really appreciate being. It's just a clarity around it. So the purpose of saying this, of course, is keep your mind healthy, because that's where it all comes to, right? And as I said, it's about recognizing the beauty of this world, the interconnectedness of this world. And that is very hard to do if the mind is projecting its past notions, and it's also concealed by tamaguna. Therefore, I invite you to bring a meditation into your day. Start very short, 5 minutes or so, and then start to expand it.
I've had a different experience though. I've meditated for, I don't know, several years. It had kind of a numbing feeling of thoughts. That was my experience. But then I started with Kriya, and Kriya had more of a purging feeling. So for me, the whole practice of Kriya is much more effective than meditation. And I've been a meditation practitioner for a long time, like 10 years.
Can you just in a brief statement describe for us what is Kriya Yoga?
It's a set of techniques that came through a lineage, which is a mixture of pranayama and meditation, but a specific form of breathing involved in it.
Ajay is saying about a very effective practice that I've also been doing Kriya for about 2 years, several hours per day. It was really amazing. It was one of the probably most amazing times in my life, because the mind gets so sattvic, you're literally like high 24/7. And of course, it's very hard to work like that. And so, eventually the person has to come down. However, it really helped the mind to just be available for what is, to be available to realities, to see, to be sensitive, to pick up the subtleties of people's gestures and facial expressions. And what do you mean when you say that? It means behind the words. So all of this is the revealing power, because revealing power is that which reveals reality. And what is that reveals reality? Well, your mind, and your mind needs to be clean. And I have a lovely book called A Meditation by Swami Tadatmananda. You may know Tadatmananda.
Oh, yes.
Swami Tadatmananda he's from Arsha Vidya school, from Dayananda school. And it's one of the best meditation books by far. It involves all of the Vedic meditations. So if you take all of the Vedas, 4 Vedas, and you extract the essence of their most effective meditations that are meant to help you increase that sattva guna, it's right there. The first section we already covered, which was in verse 5, and that was definition of the gunas. I gave you a general structure. You should be well familiar what these gunas are now. Verse 6 to 9 was how these gunas bind us. Obviously, because that which reveals we're going to be bound by feeling good all the time. We're going to be bound by knowledge and knowledge input and trying to know it all and be it all. In other words, we want to be Ishvara. And this is a big mistake in the spiritual world. You will never be all-knowing. And sometimes we will even get this impression, right? The quote, enlightened beings who are, we kind of get an impression they know it all. No, they only have studied for some years and they know that much. But you show them, what's inside a space shuttle, they're not going to know very much there. So we should not be intimidated by, these, vast, they're respectable people, but no one knows everything except Ishvara alone. That's why we are all, that's why Ishvara is Bhagavan, that one which gives the 6 bhagas. And one of those bhagas is knowledge. The other bhaga is grace. And so we all pray to the one being for grace, the one being for knowledge. Section 3 was indications or signs which guna is dominant. And this began in verse 10 last week. So let's get on to verse Sarva dvareshu dehesmin prakasha upajayate jnanam yada tada vidyad vivardham sattvamityuta.
When illumination, that is knowledge, is born in all the sense organs in this body, then may one know indeed that sattva is predominant.
Lobhav pravrittirarambhaha karmanam ashamaspraha rajasyeta nijayante vivardhe bharatarshabha.
Arjuna, the foremost in the clan of Bharata, greed, physical restlessness, undertaking of activities, mental restlessness, longing, these are born when Rajas has increased.
Aparaksho pravrittischa pramado moha evacha tamasyeta nijayante vivardhe kurunandana.
Arjuna, the joy of the Kuru family, dullness, absence of activity, indifference, and indeed delusion, these are born when tamas has increased.
Jnana indriyani are dominantly sattva guna based. This is your organs of perception, your hearing, your sight, tasting. Consequently, sattva oriented ahamkara will have the 5 sense organs engaged, meaning the absorbing capacity goes up. So again, when it says ahamkara is sattva guna dominant, it just means that your mind is, your entire subtle body is within a scope of an environment that supports calmness, that supports this revealing power to operate. In this case, when the mind is sattvic, then you have a tendency to work with information. You're attracted to details. You're attracted to really figuring things out that are usually someone else will find maybe too intimidating or too complex. You love that stuff, right? You just want to work with data, with information. And, scientists, researchers, biologists, chemists, medical field, programmers. So all of these things are really information therapists also. They want to discover what are those minute details in my patient that makes them think or tick in a certain way that causes them to perform or to believe this, and whereby they're refusing to let that go. So you want to know about the details and it interests you. And that's because, as it says, jnana indriyani, you're tuned in. In other words, the mind's tuned in. That's all it's really saying. It's very sensitive to what's going on in the environment, organizing information, reframing information, putting information together. All of this indicates sattva guna dominance at that moment. So that also means if you reverse that, if you don't like working with information, you think this is too boring, just give me a big picture, right? this big picture, you have to ask yourself, why? What's going on here? Why do I not want to know the details, right? So both details and the big picture are important. So we cannot just say, give me the big picture, and I want to ignore the details. Both are inclusive. That is a pure mind. It's curious. It wants to know the big, but also the small. Verse 12, Raja Guna leads to greed, restlessness, and longing. When a Sattva Guna is covered, then I do not have all of the facts. Therefore, the person is in a scarcity mindset, right? Only this much is available to me. In other words, they're not thinking more than what is available to them. That produces greed, this mentality of scarcity. So, and it's also going to produce longing because there's an investment for happiness in the acquisition of this object at the expense of not looking at if there is actually more and what is the value of this object in the first place. Now, that's not available there because the faculty of thinking, clarity, is Sattva Guna. But if Raja Guna dominates and Sattva Guna is overpowered by Raja Guna, then that buddhi, that discerning capacity of future, how is this going to lead into the future consequences? And what is the real value of this which I'm longing, of this which I'm desiring, of this which I want so much? What is the real value of all of that? That capacity is temporarily suppressed. Therefore, the lack of thinking comes from this excess Raja Guna. And, sports is a great example of this. This is whereby, see, everything has a purpose because Ishwara's grand order is intelligent. And so it's not like you go soccer, what's the point of soccer? What's the point of basketball? What's the point? These are great things. This is whereby we are allowed to direct our energy towards something constructive. Because if you think about it like this, suppose, your son or daughter or someone that they just love soccer. The fact is that's going to lead them to meet someone. And when they meet someone, they're going to learn something, right? They're at least going to listen to their friend who's also into soccer, right? So that's going to lead to some other consequences. And this is how it is for all of us. It's not like it's useless. Even computer games are not really useless because at least it trains the kid to focus on one thing for hours. It will be, of course, nice if you give them games that have some wisdom in them, or maybe something more creative than just killing monsters or something. So this Raja Guna also causes one to initiate new activities. So if you're the type that wants to learn every single meditation in the book that I just prescribed, like, oh yeah, this is my thing. Let's go through every meditation. That's the Raja Guna dominance. Why? You have to Sattva Guna knows what it wants. It's focused. It has clarity. In respect to my personality, I'm talking about you now, what do I need? Therefore, go and find it. Instead of, let me just go through the whole repertoire of categories, and let's try all of them. This is Raja Guna talking. It also has this need to stay engaged because, as we said last week, it finds pleasure, it finds comfort, not only starting new activities, but also staying engaged in them because it keeps the mind temporarily suppressed because Raja Guna is very painful. All of the pain, agitation, fear, that's Raja Guna projecting because lack of information. Tamaguna is also there right behind, therefore I project. In other words, whenever we have a negative expectation of, say, you're working or you find yourself somehow agitated by the client or something, or at work, that is an expectation. That means I expect them to be like this, but the reality is not like that. They were like that yesterday. They may not be like that tomorrow. So this is again projecting power. So we have to now stop and say, no, what else could there be? What's the real story? What could the story be? So we bring a little bit of thoughtfulness. And whenever you bring thoughtfulness into this need to judge, to opinionate, to project, then we're actually introducing the Sattva Guna into our minds in that moment. And that trains our vasanas, our samskaras to, when I say that, I just mean habits, to think like that in the future. It also makes the mind impatient. So if you have a level of impatience or like get to the point, okay, that has a validity, that has absolute validity there. However, suppose it is extreme, that you just wanted to kind of get to the point, move on to the next thing. My question is why? You already know knowledge is infinite. What then? Okay, then what? If you get onto the next thing, then what? Oh, I don't know, just move on to the next thing. So you interrupt that process by saying, then what? Okay, once I get what I really want, because What is impatience? What I'm seeing now is not the way that I want it, according to my samskaras. In other words, there is a there is a raga or a dvesha that is operating in the background that wants it to be different. And because it's not like that right now, I want it to change. So you just say, then what? If I do get it, then what? Okay. It also expects others to perform the things with the same efficiency as you. So suppose you're an employer or your boss, and he says, you know, you got to get this, or your colleague, even better. They want it to be exactly like you, they want you to be exactly like them. They want you to perform the same speed, same efficiency, to think like them. This is Rajaguna talking, because Rajaguna is so erratic that he cannot sit down, he cannot settle and just see the person. Where are you coming from? It's too busy thinking in its own, it's too busy projecting its own oceans onto you. So it never stops and says, let me see you as a person, as a unique individual. So this needs to be impatient, to expect people to be according to your fancies or your level of caliber. All of this is Rajaguna talking. Compassion, the highest quality of within the human scope, is entirely Sattva Guna based, because compassion involves, in fact, see, you don't really build compassion. Our natural state is compassion. You just go and witness kids. They're all compassionate, every one of them. Compassion just means they're loving, just go up to you and they just kiss you innocently, no reason. Now, what do I do to deserve that? Nothing. In other words, they just accommodate you, they accept you. So compassion is one of the highest qualities that a human being can exhibit, and it requires a lot of Sattva Guna. So you can see how this is opposite to that compassion. This is about what can I get out of this right now for myself at the expense of the environment. It also makes the mind easily irritable and disappointed easily, because as we said, there's this huge capacity of likes and dislikes operating. So reality has to be according to my fancies. And therefore, because reality is not like that, it's going to bring something different. So the person gets very easily disappointed in what happens. So what's the solution to this? What's the antidote? Any kind of disappointment equals expectation. Expectation equals projection. Projection equals a lack of thoughtfulness right now. So suppose I want to meet someone and I expect you right now to accept me like, wow, you're amazing, and expect you to behave in a certain way. And suppose that you just really are having a hard time today, maybe something happened, but you still meet me, right? And I don't consider that. Naturally, what I'm going to do, I'm going to fall back into my expectations, and I'm going to then not see you, I'm going to see my own projections. Therefore, I'm denying you the right to be yourself. So this is where Sattva Guna comes in. We have to take a moment and pause. Where could you be coming from? In fact, don't do this when you meet them. Do this before, just 1 second. Let me accommodate them. Let me accept them. Let me try to see them and be sensitive to their words, to their ways, to their being. And then you can meet up. Just try that. And then you'll see how your mind's automatically more tuned in. Why do I say try it? Because I said last week, these vasanas are compelling us to do it the ways they've already done it before. So when we give ourselves a self-command, we actually intercept that. And if you keep on doing this over and over again for some time, you actually retrain this mind to think in a different way. And finally, if one doesn't listen to a person who is Rajaguna dominant, then what ensues is passive aggressiveness. So any kind of violence, because see, even passive aggressiveness is ahimsa, it's already violent tendencies. It's just a softer version of it. Why does it turn out to be a passive aggressive or non-understanding? Or in fact, passive aggressive and impatience are actually very closely linked together. Impatience is just a different way of saying passive aggressive. Because the mind is not able to, as I say, be still. So to see another person's point of view, that requires stillness, that requires a level of consideration. Now, if the mind's too busy going, it's just not going to be able to get into that mode of seeing you from a different angle. Where could you be coming from, right? Because the train of thought, it just keeps on pouring from these vasanas, like one thought after the other, one thought after the other. And so the intellect's too preoccupied with its thoughts that are pouring, not with its thought, but with the thoughts of the samskaras. And therefore, it just doesn't have time to say, pause. Let me see what's happening in front of me. And this is why we say Vedanta is objectivity, seeing what is. In other words, I don't see what I want to see. I see what is going on right now, the way that it's happening right now. This requires to pause the mind in the background and to see what is. That means it requires a certain level of tranquility of the intellect, sattva guna. Verse 13, tama guna leads to dullness, absence of activity, indifference, and delusion. Do any of us find these qualities attractive? See, you ask any person in the world, do you want to be dull? Do you want to be indifferent? Well, I mean, that's maybe a questionable thing. Maybe some people want to be indifferent. Then again, depends where they come. If you ask a dull person, do you want to be indifferent? Yeah, well, I'm already indifferent. This is great. So anyway, all of these qualities are representative of something that is covering one's morale, one's sense of ethics. What needs to happen right now in the most appropriate way? That requires sattva guna. That requires an intellect that's reflecting the principle of dharma. Dharma being covered by tamaguna as a result of its past habits that involved dulling the mind, alcohol, too much TV, inactivity, not moving, not really going out a lot, staying at home, eating pizza, ordering Uber, right? Minimizing activity. All of these things contribute to tamaguna. And it seems very innocent, doesn't it? Just, order something online. It's going to save myself some time. But all of this through the course of time makes the person less active. There's a lovely phrase that says emotion is motion, or motion is emotion. So the more you move, there's more emotion. Emotion is required for thinking because motion and intellect are not apart. So the less we move, the less emotion we have in life. And the less emotion we have in life, the less we think. Tamaguna shuns both input of information. That means I do not want to hear what you have to say, right? I do not want to hear your research or your postulations or your ideas. No, none of that. I'm okay. I'm okay being indifferent. So it shuns information. It also shuns output of action. So both are suppressed. The jnana indriyanis and the karma indriyanis are inactive. They're at their minimum. It's not like they're completely inactive. It's just that they're only used in those absolute survival mode. Let's do it for my little circle of influence. But beyond that, let's go to the bar and let's get kind of, drink or something. Let's dumb the senses down. Now, the question is, why are they both suppressed? Well, again, you need to think, right? You need to respond. If I cannot respond to the environment, what does that mean? My intellect's not available. If my intellect's not available, then how can the senses be available? Because the senses are simply doing the bidding of the intellect. They simply follow what the intellect calculates. If the intellect is covered, then the senses are also inactive. So there's a direct correlation there. Now, in terms of spirituality, we also have these three gunas operating in the spiritual field. How do you think tamaguna manifests, considering it is absence of inactivity, indifference, that means not being sensitive to you, not being sensitive to where you could be coming from, not being sensitive to your journey, to your uniqueness as a human being who has very unique path, not being sensitive to any of that. How do you think this expresses in the spiritual world?
Spiritual intolerance.
It's rejecting anything divine. In spirituality, one of the most common ways is fatalism. So the person takes to the path of this is predestined, because predestined implies what? I don't have to put any action into the field. It is all predestined. I'm just there witnessing the results that are already pre-planned for me. And that's a perfect excuse to support inactivity, inaction. The second most common way, it doesn't have to be in the spiritual field, is fantasy. Now, I'm not talking about active visualization that is very useful in athletic fields, for example. It's been proven that if you visualize winning the game, or maybe winning an extra 100 meters or discovering something, if you visualize that, then it actually helps the mind to come to that reality. It actually helps the mind a lot because the mind needs some pre-planning, and visualization helps that. Fantasy is different. Fantasy is an excuse not to go out there, because it's much easier to fantasize some event that I would fancy than to actually be out there and actually accomplish that event in real world. Therefore, tamaguna in a form of fatalism, but also in a form of fantasy, fantasizing about someone, about maybe some past or whatever it is. This is Tamaguna talking. So whenever these cues, these markers come, that's a cautionary sign that we can start to come out of. And also when it comes to, suppose, an employee who is Tamaguna dominant, then they want to be told exactly what to do. In other words, you need to tell them exact instructions. Do this and then do that. And if this happens, then do this. In other words, it's a very kind of a computer program, little instruction, you give it to them, because the mind is simply not available to think, not that it's not available, it just doesn't care, right? Because it's indifferent. It's indifferent if the business fails, I'll just go to get into a different job, a different employer, right? So it's not sensitive to the employer, it's not sensitive to the employees. Maybe it is to one or two, but then again, you can see how these behaviors play out in clients. Suppose you're working with a client of a particular physical or mental condition. Then if they're Tamaguna dominant, no matter how hard you try, it's going to be very hard, if next to impossible, to help them actually come out of that Tamaguna. Because see, we've got Karma Yoga chapter 3, right? It's a long chapter, right? It's not just a matter of instruction. Hey, go out there and think different, dad, mom, or think different, friend, or think different, right, about how things could be. It's a long journey. So end of the day, the person has to really almost, kind of select their niche group. Who am I to work with? Do I want to work with clear people who are also going to help me? Or do I want to work with people that it's very hard to get through? I mean, working with the Raja Guna dominant CEO, it's actually exciting. But someone who's Tao doesn't want to think and they depend on you for everything, it's very hard to convince them. Let's put a summary to this. Chapter 14, verse 10 to 13 is indications of which Guna is dominant. They are there to help you see where you're at right now, tomorrow, after tomorrow. It's not there to necessarily compare yourself to others or to judge the world. Oh, no, Rajaguna, let's get out of here. Oh, Sattva Guna, I want a piece of that. Right, let's go. Right. So this is really about you. Now, also, this Triguna model is actually very useful to understand the world. So yes, it can be used to observe. And through your observation, you can see. So let me take a moment to recognize where's dullness playing out? Where's projection playing out? Where's clarity playing out? Where's this moments of inspiration? And then you can say, so, chapter 14, I remember hearing about these gunas, and here they are before me. So as I say, it's always a model that you can fall back onto. The next topic is topic 4. We've completed 3 topics so far. And this topic 4 is how each guna affects the afterlife. So what happens when the mind is a guna dominant disposition and then it dies? What happens after life? Yada sattve pravridhetu pralayam yati dehabrta tadota mavidam lokan amalan pratipadyate.
When the embodied one dies, when sattva has increased, then it gains the worlds of those who know the highest, that are free from impurity.
Rajasi pralayam gatva karma sangeshu jayate tata pralinastamasi mudhayo nishu jayate.
Having died with the predominance of Rajas, he is born amongst those committed to karma. So too, the one who died with the predominance of tamas is born in the wombs of those who have no discriminative faculty.
Verse 14 to 15. Let's start with verse 14. Reading, death in respect to sattva leads to gaining higher worlds. This is obviously not referring to a jnani, to a jivan muktaha, because upon death, the jivan muktaha is free of these 3 gunas. So there's no question of, as I said last week, darkness or just being aware of nothing. Now I'm nothing and I'm just aware of nothing. No, this is all a notion. This is all projecting notion of the mind. Also because the Jivan Muktaha is now at one with Brahman and Ishvara at the same time upon death. Therefore, I am everything at the same time and my nature is limitless. And I am that limitlessness alone, pervading in and through everything, free of the need to come back into a body and experience myself as a limited being. So that's the experience of a Jivan Mukta. Okay, now when the ahamkara is dominated by sattva guna before death, then two things are true. Firstly, that individual, when I say individual, I'm talking about the subtle body, specifically the antahkarana, specifically the mind, intellect, and the ahamkara, but also the causal body that sustains that subtle body. So you could just say the antahkarana. So that antahkarana, upon physical death, as the verse says, goes to a higher loka, higher than bhuloka. In the Vedic tradition, we have 14 lokas. Bhuloka is in the middle, and they go into the higher loka to exhaust the punya karma that they have gained here in this world. So suppose that you're doing a lot of charity work and you're giving donations and you're starting institutions to help the children in Africa or third world countries. And you're just really, one of those like Gandhi types, right? One who wants to reform a cause for the betterment of the good of all, or at least as much as you can. Now, suppose that person who is highly dharmic does not attain moksha, who has not really gotten the 4 graces assigned to them during their life, and that is Ishwara's grace, your own efforts, the guru, but also the methodology. These 4 have to come in one's life to attain moksha. If one of them is missing, then it's going to be incomplete. So suppose they die. Now what happens is they will gain a higher world. Now what exactly happens then? The subtle body will still gain a physical body, but the physical body will be in a much more subtler state. Therefore, the person is able to enjoy greater pleasures. To demonstrate this, right now, your physical body is solid. Can you go through a wall? No. Can you fly as a physical body? No. Now, suppose that physical body is subtler in nature. Can you fly then? Absolutely. Can you go through a wall then? You, the subtle body and the physical body? Absolutely. So that's a way to demonstrate when the body is more subtle, then it can experience much greater pleasures. In fact, because this physical body is so gross, so dense, it's just heavy, right? What is the mass? 60 kilograms, 70 kilograms, whatever it is, 100 kilograms, right? It's heavy, right? So there, and plus on top of that, gravity is pulling us down, right? So it's very hard to experience greater pleasures while on earth because we got the law of physics operating on this physical body. We've got the law of the brain chemistry, neurology. I suppose the brain is a little bit covered up with some substances or foods. How are you going to think then? Not very good. That means even a genius, if you give them foods or you make them stop eating for 14 days, you watch what happens to the memory. Short-term memory is guaranteed. Short-term memory loss, or in other words, we're entirely dependent upon food, the air we breathe, how many vitamins, the metabolism rate, the friends that are around us to support us and to keep us going, the temperature in the room. Suppose it's very hot, it already becomes harder to think. Suppose it's cold, it also becomes harder to think. So many variables are pulling down this body. And because this body is an upadhi, a superimposition over the subtle body, no matter how brilliant the subtle body is, what's still pulling it down? The physical body. And this is a very important point because in the spiritual field, we usually say, so the enlightened person is experiencing bliss, right? And we imagine they're in this blissful state. The reason why that is impossible is because that person is still governed by these laws and orders, the same laws and orders that everyone else is governed. Gravity, law of physics, physical body, physical pain, right? Back pain, headaches, all of these things pull the individual down. So you can now start to see when we get to verse 19 onwards, when we get out of these 5 sections, and I say, what is the quality of a Jivan Mukta in respect to these 3 gunas? One of them will be total acceptance of their shortcomings, of their apparent shortcomings. Of course, it doesn't affect me, but it affects the me body, the me subtle body, the gross body. In other words, it's about really accepting rather than trying to constantly control. Because no matter how much one tries to control, in fact, you've been trying to control this since beginningless lifetimes, and what has that gotten you? Only another birth. In other words, that proves alone that controlling or trying to be great simply is not possible because of this physical body is so heavy and it's dense and it pulls everything about the individual down. So this is a matter of acceptance. Okay, sure, not functioning today very well. I'm okay with that. Instead of going, oh, something's wrong with me, right? So as I say, this model is something to fall back on, and it's a brilliant model. Should the subtle body not gain a higher loka and therefore enjoy greater pleasures, which is also synonymous with, in the Christian system, we got heaven. In the Vedic system, we got more accuracy. We got the 7 higher lokas, and one of them is Svarga loka. The Brahma loka is the highest. The Brahma loka is whereby, according to the Vedic model, is the creator of the universe. How to understand this? Right now, inside your stomach lining, there is a germ, call it a good bacteria. And in reference to that bacteria, suppose that bacteria has a brain and it's not thinking, who is my creator? You're the creator. You are the creator of that germ. In other words, that bacteria entirely depends upon you. You are Brahmaji for that bacteria. That bacteria cannot imagine you because you're so complex, so huge in reference to that small little one tiny cell good bacteria in the stomach lining, looking around going, oh, what's this universe? Who's the creator and who's this and what am I? What's my relationship to it? Well, it's not away from the creator and the creator is not away from the whole. So Brahmaloka is whereby, quote, the being of the universe, the all knowledge resides, who encompasses the entire world, just like we're a little good bacteria right now inside Brahmaji, inside Ishwara. Again, careful. I'm not talking about some person out there with a physical body. I'm talking about the whole. This is a method to understand for the mind. The total intelligence in which these small jivas find themselves in, which are governed by the laws and orders, governed by this total intelligence, which is of the 3 gunas in the form of revealing, projecting, but also veiling. Okay, so again, this is not about now comparing, going some beings out there and we're little good bacteria here or bad bacteria. Okay. Should the body not gain a higher loka, the only other option is it will be born in a religious family, a highly discerning family, compassionate family with holds values to high grounds. It is part of the customs within the family tradition to uphold the principles of the higher being, the Lord, to attend to social services that are of nature of intelligent conversations. Your dad or mom could be involved in some work of research, or they could be having some important position in the society that involves information or anything that involves thinking, like engineer, also an architect. Any of these smart individuals that we find in society, you're lucky, right? You find yourself, wow, my mom is works in NASA and my dad is going to the moon next year or something like that, right? So in other words, this helps us explain why are we born in different families, because we're carrying over those causes that we have done in the last life. And these causes cause us to enjoy or just to have the family that we have. So you have 2 choices: either get born in a family, it's not like we select, but it's on the basis of our past causes, or if not, then you're on your own. Now you can say, okay, so my family never taught me about values, never taught me about love, never taught me about listening. The word emotion was banned in the house, right? So all of the suppose. And you say, okay, well, now I'm just a victim of my past causes, so I'm just going to live like that. Or you can say, okay, so despite all of that, I choose to restart and live this life as though I'm privileged. In other words, I'm going to, through my own willpower, research and look and associate with the right people and associate with the right faces and learn the right knowledge. You still have willpower of your own to get out of that slumber and rise on your own. In fact, the entire message of the Upanishads in one summary is lift yourself by yourself. That beautiful quote, lift yourself by yourself. In other words, exercise your faculties and get out of the slumber through your own actions. Verse 15. Death in respect to Raja causes one to be born in family of doers. Tama causes one to be born in a dull family who has little value in independent thinking and high priority on survival. Person is born in Bhuloka, a family of doers. Bhuloka is the only place where action is possible, because we do actions. Why? We do actions to gain results. And the earth is the only place that allows you to not only gain results, but also to create new actions. So it's just a continuity of the habits that the person was working in the past life. So they cannot be born in any other loka, because every other loka except Bhuloka, again, action is possible. Every other is either to exhaust your punya or exhaust your papam. Papam means all of the deeds that are that were opposite to morality. So Bhuloka is in the middle, and then you got the 6 upper lokas, and then you got the 7 lower lokas. Now the 7 lower lokas are for exhausting papa. So any violent, despicable deeds that are performed on earth in one lifetime, person literally gets manifested into a different realm that is much harder, that is much heavier, much more dense. So the more we go down in this 14 lokas model, the denser the subtle body is, the harder it is to enjoy oneself. So again, it's a place to exhaust one's papa karma. Anything above is a place to exhaust one's punya karma. So this is the Vedic model. Whereas Tama oriented ahamkara, that means the person is, they were thinking about violence, they were watching violence movies, they were drinking, they were smoking, they were doing drugs, any kind of lazy approach, not thinking, indifferent, insensitive, and a person dies. What happens? Either the person goes to the bottom 7 lokas, that means underneath the earth, or they get born on earth as either a plant or an animal. And this is, again, according to the Vedas. Now, this is the one section, by the way, that cannot be really verified. And in fact, we have no way of proving this. So it is that one small section in the Vedas that you will have to either take by the word of authority of the scriptures, or you can discard. It doesn't really matter, but I'm just giving you a warning, just in case you're going, okay, how do you know this? But then again, there is some level of faith there in this particular section. Topic 5, effects while living. Karmana sukritasyahuhu satvikam nirmalam palam rajasastu palam dukkam ajnanam tamasah palam.
They say that the result for the good action done is connected to sattva and is pure, a result that is free from any distress. But pain is the result of rajas, and ignorance is the result of tamas.
Sattva sanjayate jnanam rajaso lobha evacha pramadamo hau tamasaha bhavato jnanam evacha.
From sattva is born knowledge, and indeed from rajas is greed. Apathy and delusion are from tamas, and so also is ignorance.
Urdvam gachanti sattvastaha madhye tishtanti rajasaha jaganya gunavrittistaha adho gachanti tamasaha.
Those abiding in sattva go to the worlds higher up. Those belonging to rajas remain in the middle, and those belonging to tamas, having the nature of the lowest guna, go down.
Topic 5, the effects of 3 gunas while living. Let's start with verse 16, and we shall read, commencing, sattva, colored actions, cause punya. Rajas, colored, sorrow, and tamaguna, colored, causes ignorance. If one's actions are sattvic, and how do we know they're sattvic? There will be a sense of accommodation, those 20 values we talked about. One's able to understand another person's point of view. Empathy, that means feeling into another's pain or happiness and generally sharing that. Or charity even, charity in form of giving one's chocolate away to your friend or someone else. That's also charity. Or just, again, that sharing attitude, that sharing spirit, that will produce punyam in the future. So go and give chocolate to someone and you'll have some punyam in the future. But it goes even beyond that. So if you share and you give and you understand, then all of the goodness that happens in your life from today's standpoint That's a result of all of those actions that were at some point sattva guna based. Sattva guna actions also throw light onto matters. So suppose you're a person that's able to extract the essence of the teaching or of a field and provide it and say it or articulate it very well. That is sattva guna. So again, this is topic whereby able to identify the effects of them. And one of the effects is articulation, enunciation, or creating an understandable, easy to follow method for others, right? Or presenting or showing the core, what's the crux of the message. All of that requires sharpness and lucidity. That is sattva guna. It also is expressed in a form of peace and harmony with your environment. So suppose you find yourself in a social gathering and you just feel at peace. You feel like easy, like relaxed, right? You're not really concerned about yourself, what others are thinking, what should you say. All of that is also sattva guna presence. Within the home or your family, there's a sense of democracy. Democracy in terms of, let me be open, let me hear your standpoint, let me see where you're coming from. And what's really important is resolution is highly regarded. In other words, everyone's listened to, and communicating is very important in that family. And not only just communicating for sake of getting one's stuff out, but coming to a harmonious union, to harmonious agreement together. So this is highly regarded in a sattvic family. Of course, communication is number one value for such a mind. Now, that was sattva guna. If the actions are raja guna dominant, or what kind of results do they produce? What kind of effects do they have? The first one is they will create a very interesting person, very charismatic, outgoing, bubbly, right? Dynamic, full of zest, full of vigor, full of kind of like zeal, right? And they're very interesting, right? They want to hang around with them, and they're just generally a person that gets things done, right? You can rely upon them, especially if they've got some sattva guna backing that up. At the same time, if it's dominant, then it can produce underneath all of that look, that charismatic and kind of outgoing out there and go-getter, there's agitation, there is fear, and there is some complexity of self-esteem, because the person is doing all of these things to appear, to project themselves as such, as a successful person, as this person or that person. So this is, of course, not for everyone, but it can manifest in these kinds of anxiety behind the look. In other words, I see one thing, but if you really look behind the person, you talk to them, they will tell you a story, and they will tell you something, why they're so compelled to achieve, to attain, to present themselves, and to be so good. Suppose you got a home full of raja guna dominant kids, or like a spouse or something, then that can create heated arguments. It can create short tempers. It can create a place whereby someone doesn't want to listen, right? Because they're too busy projecting. And so they're not open to hear your standpoint. They don't really see you. They see their ideas. It's greater than yours. I mean, I'm so identified with my projections that I'm not able to see otherwise. This is within the home. And also, for such a person, they will find peace at specific times or places. So they will go out and they will seek in traveling. Like, let's travel the world. Let's go for camping, right? Or let's go for some excursion, right? Let's go sightseeing, because that's the only way that the mind is able to subside its agitations. And as I said, Raja Guna, the only way it subsides is by doing actions. So anything that is out there, travel packages, or of course, we didn't have that for some time. However, you can still see how the world is driven by consumerism and by traveling and discovery, and it's all justified. I'm just curious. But underneath all of that is a much bigger story. Raja Guna is also there brewing. This is why we settle as we grow up. We slowly start to settle. We start to travel less because the mind is lost its Raja Guna over dominance. Therefore, it's more kind of calmer now to be at peace with oneself. Finally, if the actions are tamasic, then it will produce perpetual ignorance, because tamaguna is that which covers. Now, if I'm covered, then I don't have a motivation to look, because there's nothing to see, right? In other words, it's completely covered. There's no means of thoughts or could there be something more? Because the intellect's not available to even pose that question. So the more ignorant I am, the more I build my ignorance, the more I sustain and perpetuate my ignorance, not only to you, but to myself and to everyone else. So this is Tama Guna. It also produces monotonous actions, because anything that's been done before, it actually resorts back to the most primal part of the brain. It just basically goes into that, the neurology is etched in a certain way. So you just access that and just play that over and over again. It doesn't need thinking. It's very autonomous. And thereby it's the actions are the same. There's no sense of let's do something novel, let's do something creative, let's do something different. No, it's every day it's the same. Verse 18. Upon death, a sattva dominant mind goes to the higher world, travels to the higher world. Raja dominant remains in the middle, and Tama dominant in the lower loka. So again, just a repetition of verse 14 and 15. The sattvika dominant goes to the 6 higher lokas to gain higher pleasures and gains a subtler gross body. Rajasika dominant stays in the middle, stays on earth, gets reborn in a different family, family of doers. Let's do something, maybe a business owner or just workers. And Tamaguna goes to the lower 7. So one point I want to bring here is there is no such thing as higher, lower. Again, it is think of it as a parallel reality. In fact, in quantum physics, they will also postulate that there is, they will bring out this idea of parallel reality. So think of it as parallel realities, 14 lokas. So it's not like physical higher, like there's, space and there's the edge of outer space and there's a higher loka. So it's within a different time space domain. Just like, for example, you got multiple TV channels and they all coexist, yes? So they're able to show this signal without interfering with each other, all simultaneously at the same time. And one of the examples to understand these lokas, these parallel universes, these parallel realities, and this is all mithya, by the way. I'm not talking about mithya now. I'm not talking about satyam. So all of these 14 lokas are all underneath the line of Maya. So suppose you're dreaming. How much traveling do you need to do in a dream to arrive to the waking state? You can't, right? No amount of traveling in the dream is ever going to get you to the waking state. They have no connection whatsoever. And yet both of them are governed by space and time, just different. So in other words, they both coexist, but in a different order of mithya reality. Another example is there's a person dreaming right now somewhere in this world, right? No doubt. And for them, that dream is absolutely real, right? They're as convinced as we are convinced about this waking state that this is now going on in the way that it's going on. And we're having a lovely conversation, but they're also having a lovely conversation in the dream, probably more Mickey Mousey, right? More fluid, but we're both convinced equally. And yet we both coexist in different states at the same time. Another example is NDEs, near-death experience, where the person will go into a short-term cardiac arrest or something, and they will go out for 17 or 30 seconds. And they will say that, I've met, of course, it's going to be a familiar figure pertinent to the one they related to in their waking life, whoever it is. And they will say, I've met them and I was led into this place and I was shown my whole life before me. And I had like these columns presented towards me and all of the people that I've hurt and all the people that I was loving towards. And I was also now showing my true nature, and it was so beautiful. I wanted to stay because it felt so secure and warm and cozy. And it felt more real than this waking state, than this life. And I wanted to stay, they say. But then always someone comes over and says, no, you're not finished yet with your work. In technical language, your swadharma, your prarabdha karma still hasn't fully exhausted in this life assigned to you. And then the person, at the moment they say, okay, I understand, I will go back. That's when the heart actually starts to come back in the physical world. Now they report back and they say, I was gone for like eternity, right? It was like, wow, it was so long time. But they say it was only 17 seconds. So for that individual in the afterlife was completely, in fact, they testified it was more real than this, right? Than this state. And yet we, the doctor, in fact, was also experiencing time, space, but from a different standpoint. Another example to explain this parallel is suppose a mosquito. A mosquito lives 7 days. Okay, we live 80 years, right? Now imagine a mosquito, you give him a more intelligent intellect, and he goes, wow, 80 years is so much, so long, I cannot even imagine. So for a mosquito, 7 days is extraordinarily long. But for us, 7 days, it's 1 weekend of another Gita class, right? So now who's more real, right? You cannot discard a mosquito because a mosquito is also a jiva. Who knows, maybe you were a mosquito at some point, right? You bit me and now I'm not teaching you, so it doesn't matter. So, right, who's more real now? In other words, it's all real because mithya within mithya within mithya. Every order of reality is real. Okay, now finally, the conclusion of these 5 sections. I've now concluded part 1 all the way to part 5. The conclusion of which started from verse 5 to verse 18. I've just done verse 18 now, is the analysis of these 3 gunas. And it shows us, first of all, how these gunas bind us. So it's our job to identify, I'm now being trained temporarily by a certain behavior, and it's just identify it and then recognize it. Okay, so this is the 3 gunas operating. You don't have to go more than that. It's not like you're trying to now negate and go into meditation, and that should be part of your life. It's also knowing the mechanism behind the prakriti. So once you know the mechanism, it loses its power to grab you. It loses its hold on you. So it's really about knowledge aspect of the world that we live in. So once we gain that mechanism, how it works behind the scenes, then you still have a proper relationship with it now. It's just not so kind of like so into any of these, buying into any of these gunas. So you gain a perspective change. It gets corrected in the light of knowledge of the 3 gunas. Okay, now closing. And finally, I want to say is next verse from 19 to 27, Krishna is going to change the tone and is going to say, how do we release ourselves from the guna hold? And this is what Meena, of course, was bringing up. Now you can see how Krishna doesn't miss anything out. Of course, how do we now free ourselves completely from these 3 gunas? Now, important point is also about past lives I want to bring. See, this past life can be looked at from 2 ways. The incorrect way to look at it is there was some person called Lorena, right? And she was like doing her things in a past life. And now she's enjoying this person called, obviously new name now assigned to you, Lorena. See, the person, this jiva, right? The antahkarana that was quote there in the past life, that was a totally different person. It has nothing to do with this person right now. Just like right now, right? All of the, suppose one doesn't gain moksha, but they're extremely dharmic. All of the actions you're actually doing for someone else, right? In the next life, because there's no connection between this person and that person it's going to continue there in the next life. This is why a lot of people say, I don't believe in past life. It's because you're thinking about it in an incorrect way.
So we could be a male, or we could be a different culture, or we could have been all these different, like not even the same gender.
Yeah, exactly. And the samskaras are going to be the same, of course. So this person, which we now call Lorena in this life, she has some tendencies that were also there for that other person in the previous life, right? But there's no actually Lorena in the previous life. So that's the thing to exclude out of this past life thing.